What's up, guys? Brett Okamoto from ESPN here to talk about UFC Fight Night on Saturday in Milwaukee. Of course, it was the last UFC card on that 7-year broadcast deal with Fox that began back in 2011. It was a pretty cool way to end that partnership. Iaquinta defeating Kevin Lee in a 5-round unanimous decision. At the end of the fight, he's walking Kevin down with his hands at his sides, yelling at him, slipping punches without the defense up. Just a spectacular performance, a really symbolic performance of what Al brings to the table, the confidence. You know, this is the guy who stepped in against Khabib Nurmagomedov earlier this year on essentially 24 hours notice when all the Nurmagomedov's opponents were falling out. And then earlier in his career, you know, just a lot of starts and stops, contract disputes with the UFC, a lot of inactivity. But when Al Iaquinta is on and when he's performing and when he's happy, which he told me earlier this week that he's happy with his contract moving forward, he thinks he's finally in a place where he can just focus on the fights. You see the talent that this guy has. He's well-rounded. He's extremely, extremely confident. He's got a high fight IQ. I thought all of that was on display on Saturday. And Al Iaquinta is going to get big fights. Man, he is in that stratosphere of the lightweight division where you can really pair him up with all kinds of guys. He mentioned Conor McGregor. Probably not going to happen, but I would watch that fight. He mentioned Tony Ferguson. Now, I think Tony Ferguson deserves the next title shot at Nurmagomedov, but we still don't know when Khabib will come back. He still needs to face that potential suspension in Nevada. Hopefully that'll get wrapped up sometime next month. We'll know how long he's going to be out. But Al mentioned, hey, if Khabib is out for an extended amount of time, I'll take Tony. I think that that's a really good fight, and I would agree with him. I also think Max Holloway moving up from 145 to face Tony Ferguson is a great fight as well, but you see what I'm saying. You know, there's a lot of different options there for Al Iaquinta. Justin Gaethje, who was supposed to fight Justin Gaethje earlier this year, that fight fell through. They could put that fight together. So Al clearly in a great place coming off of Saturday. On the flip side of that, you have Kevin Lee, and Kevin Lee, he's got some problems. Kevin Lee has some issues here, and he has some decisions to make. You know, this was supposed to be his fight where he just grabbed everything that I just described for Al Iaquinta, those big fights. You know, going into 2019, he was going to be, you know, maybe one fight away from a title shot. He's always talked about how he matches up well with Khabib Nurmagomedov, and I don't necessarily disagree with him, but when you look at some of the things that Kevin Lee is struggling with in this division, you know, it starts with the weight cut. It starts with his cut getting down to 155. There's concerns every time about whether he's going to make it and then what impact that's going to have on him on fight night. The cardio issues are always a concern. You know, in addition to that big cut, Kevin Lee also just has a fighting style that uses a lot of energy. And when a fight is 5 rounds, you know, and you get to that point in his career where if he's going to get these big fights, they're probably going to be 5 rounds. They're probably going to be main events on things like a UFC Fight Night. I think 5 rounds works against Kevin Lee. If he's not able to finish the fight early on, then you wonder how he's going to do. And Al Iaquinta really ran away with that fight in the 4th and 5th rounds. So does he move up to 170? I think that comes with some problems as well, because what does Kevin Lee do best? He holds guys down, he controls them, he passes their guard, he advances positions on the ground. He's going to be able to do that against these bigger guys at 170. Maybe, you know, maybe he can make some of those adjustments, but then you talk about the energy consumption as well. It's going to take a lot of energy to hold down those bigger guys. So you can understand why Kevin Lee is always talking about that 165-pound division. He kind of falls in between it, but I don't want to make this all about size. You know, Kevin Lee, he's got to get out of the way of some of those punches. He could not get out of the way of Al Iaquinta's jab. Once he couldn't get the fight to the ground, he really did not do well against Al Iaquinta's boxing style. So he's got some technical things to work on. He's got some. The guy's still in his mid-20s, so I'm not saying Kevin Lee is done, but you can see it on his face after the fight, the level of devastation and emotion that he knows that this was a big opportunity for him. And he came up short because I did not think that this was a controversial scorecard. I thought it was pretty clear that Kevin Lee lost this fight. In the co-main event, another lightweight fight. I mean, what can you say about Dan Hooker? The ability that he has to take punches and keep coming forward, absolutely amazing. But I will tell you that Dan Hooker coming into this weekend, he didn't want everybody's respect for being a tough guy. He wanted everybody's respect for being a top 10 lightweight. And when you look at just the result of this fight, Dan Hooker was outclassed in this matchup. It was one-way traffic. It was completely lopsided in favor of Edson Barboza. I thought the early leg kicks on Dan Hooker from Barboza, he never really recovered from that. He was hurt from them early, and then he was essentially trying to force the issue, I thought. And again, showed a tremendous amount of heart, but Barboza saw that coming. He recognized it once he had hurt Hooker's leg, and then he picked him apart from there. And Barboza, you know, as much as you're happy for him and you say that this is a tremendous performance, which it was, it's hard to get excited about him as a title challenger because he just lost those 2 fights in very convincing fashion against Khabib Nurmagomedov and Kevin Lee. I think the UFC probably, and I would say that they should do this, will give him some strikers because it's just so much fun when Edson Barboza is in there with another striker. But as far as getting to a title shot again, or at all, because the guy's never fought for a title, he's got some work to do, and he has to prove at some point that he can beat one of those top-notch wrestlers. Last thing I want to talk about on this card, Sergio Pettis moving up from 125 to 135 to face Rob Font, and more so than even making this completely about Pettis, I think this is just an interesting thing to keep an eye on in this sport. I think it's no secret that the UFC's flyweight division is probably on borrowed time. They've been releasing a lot of those 125ers from their contracts. The feeling is that that division will no longer exist. However, they're going to offer some of those 125ers an opportunity to move up, which I guess is a great thing, but you see this in Sergio Pettis. Not taking anything away from Rod Font, who I really like. I really enjoy watching him fight. I think he is a guy who can break into that top 10, top 5 if all the cards fall right for him, but he's not a top 3 guy at 135 pounds. He had a 5-3 record coming into the UFC, or a 5-3 record in the UFC coming into this fight. Sergio Pettis is a guy that we have looked at for a long time as maybe a title challenger in one of those divisions, and he was overmatched in this fight, and I think size had a lot to do with that. He just couldn't, the range that Rob Font set, the grappling exchanges, you could see that size played a factor in that. And so what I'm saying is something to keep an eye on is these flyweights who do stick with the UFC and do move up to 135 weight class. I'm not saying none of them can have success, but the sport is at a point, it's developed and evolved to a situation where guys are looking for every advantage possible, and size is one of those. So it's just going to be tough. I think it's going to be tough sledding for any of those flyweights who do stick around in this promotion in the UFC, who do decide to make a move up to 135, if in fact and when in fact they close that 125-pound division. It's going to be a challenge for them, trying to crack into the top 10, top 5 of that division, just because everybody's good at the top. And so if some of those guys are bigger than the others, and you could see that, Rob Font was just bigger than Sergio Pettis, that's going to be tough for them to overcome.